I'm Adam Cardy. I'm the CEO and founder of Props. I'll be moderating this panel. Panels on how to raise money for your startup. We have Madeline Winter to my left. She is on the founding team and the VP of operations at Biobots. We have Yasmine Mustafa from Roar for Good, who's the CEO and founder. And we have Justin Goldman from Zoomer, who is the CEO and founder. So before we dive in, I want to ground the topic. There are generally two ways to fund your startup. There's bootstrapping, and then there's raising capital. This panel is going to focus largely on raising capital, but I want to say a few words about bootstrapping before we get started there. So bootstrapping generally just means you're using either your own money or your revenues to capitalize your company. The means is personal wealth. You could, take a side job. You could take revenue from your company. You could even crowdfund could be placed under bootstrapping in a certain capacity. So the pros is that you remain you optimize capital efficiency. The other thing is if you do choose to go raise money, in many cases you'll get better terms. Cons are it's a lot of stress. If you're depleting your own personal wealth as well as your company, it adds a lot of extra stress to your life. And any side job means you're focusing less on the company you're trying to build, and that is the hardest part about building a company. So any distractions are going to pull away from there. So it's worth pointing out that you can always bootstrap a company and then go raise capital, but you can't do the inverse. It's very difficult to do so, at least I should say. So here in Philly, we've seen many great companies, but just two examples that have taken this path are RG Metrics and DuckDuckGo. They bootstrapped for many years. Then from there, they went out and raised venture capital. So on raising capital, I kind of want to, it's basically you're selling your shares inside your company to an investor who's looking for much greater returns farther down the line. The investors can be friends and family. They could be accelerators, angel investors, equity crowdfunding, which is new since the Jobs Act, and venture capital. So just to really ground this, most people view that raising capital is an easy thing. We always see the TechCrunch articles and so on and so forth, and you could go out and get money and it's easy. It's not the case at all. So here's the chances of you closing money from any VC fund are smaller than becoming a Rhodes Scholar, getting into Harvard, or qualifying as a Navy SEAL. To quantify that, that's less than 8%. And that's what we could actually know about how many companies have tried to go out and just never even made themselves known that they were doing so. So raising money, this is a quote from Paul Graham, raising money is the second hardest part of starting a startup. The hardest part is making something people want, but the second biggest cause of death is probably the difficulty of raising money. Fundraising is brutal. This is especially true for newbies. So all of us on this panel have gone from being newbies to up the line of more experienced and have had many, many, many failures and some successes. So on that note, I want to start turning to the panel and say, can you each briefly tell us about different mistakes you made while raising venture capital?
So I would be in the newbie category here. At Biobots, we create 3D bioprinters and bioinks. So we're all fresh out of college, and we started this venture. And obviously, none of us have a house to put a mortgage or anything like that. So we bootstrapped for a little bit, and then we decided to raise our seed round starting in February, March of last year. And we made a few mistakes, having it have been our first try. And one of the big mistakes we made was we had a list of all of the potential investors that we wanted to talk to, and we spent a lot of time curating that list and making sure that we could get a meeting or a face-to-face or a call with every single one of those people on the list, and we did a really great job of that. Where we totally screwed up so badly is that then we took that list and we didn't prioritize who was most likely to invest in us and who was least likely to invest in us. So instead of approaching our least likely first with our first iteration of our deck, we approached our most likely. And we had run through all of our hottest, most likely leads in the first couple weeks, which obviously we had amazing feedback, and we iterated on the deck, and it was great moving forward, but it was a huge learning point for us.
Yeah, for me, so I actually bootstrapped my first company, 123 Link, a couple years ago. That was fun and somewhat not fun. And then I'm also a newbie in terms of raising funding from so far I've actually only raised from angels, and we did a crowdfunding campaign as well. For me, one of the biggest lessons learned that I had was just this changing my mindset, because when I would approach investors, I felt like they had something that I needed versus they had something that they needed. So for me, just working on changing that, so I wasn't kind of leaping through circles, was a huge lesson for me. It was actually something my co-founder taught me. I really, really like that lesson, actually, with everything in life. And then he's raised money before, and he said his biggest mistake was taking it from anybody who would give it to him. So that's been something that we've been very focused on, getting it from the right people. I'm running a social venture company, so working with social investors that understand the impact and what we're trying to do. We want to change the world. So we have been solely focused on that. We've said no a few times. And we've been very lucky in the sense that we have a good grasp of the Philadelphia community. We have good networks within the community. And it's actually been relatively easy for us. So our lead investor, we met with him once, and he signed $75,000. He wired the check a week later. Apparently that never happens. I didn't know that. I thought it was great. And then going through Ben Franklin, that was more tedious, but it was also great. And then DreamIt was awesome. DreamIt, for those who don't know, is a VC incubator that basically helps you go from start to launch in about 3 months.
So what in particular about your mindset changing? What was the mindset you had before, and what did it change to?
My mindset was, so anytime I would get an email or I would email them, it was more like, hey, please let me know when you're available for a call. Like, please talk to me. Please meet with me. And then in terms of changing the mindset, it was more so believing that I have something that they need more than the other way around. And it took a while to convince myself of that, but it made a huge difference in talking to VCs and even writing my emails and stuff like that.
Yeah, and before Justin speaks, Justin has an article that he suggested we cancel the panel and just read it, which was how to convince investors. And the essence of the article from Paul Graham was on truth. If you just focus on the truth element, the confidence in what you're putting forth and selling, that they have more to gain from you, it changes the dynamic greatly.
So the question is, what are the biggest mistakes we made?
Yeah, first, actually, want to talk about your bio, just your previous companies, and then that.
Sure. So my name is Justin Goldman. I've done 3 startups. First company, we did not raise capital. Second company, we attempted to raise capital. And third company, we've had a lot of success raising capital. So the biggest mistake that I would say I've made probably to date is timing. First company, we actually built something that was fundable, and we should have raised capital, but we were of the mindset of bootstrapping and had a lifestyle business kind of mindset, and kind of missed a big opportunity to scale something that should have been scaled. So the first one was timing, knowing when you are fundable and taking advantage of it. And the second company, we were not fundable, thought we were, and went out to try to raise capital and failed, right? So tried to raise angel money, maybe like $250,000, and ended up not being able to do that, and that was a big problem for us at the time. So I would say understanding when you're actually ready to raise capital, and missing that twice in the first startup and the second startup. Third startup, I think we nailed that.
Great. So earlier this morning, Rick Nucci pointed out that your first 10 sales are some of the hardest sales that you have to make. I find a very high correlation to that to raising capital. Getting your first money in is the hardest money in. I view around the first third. Can you all each speak about the first investor that you were able to close and what you saw that went right in that situation? And how did that help, if it helped your company in terms of getting momentum? Like, was the later part of the round move a lot faster than the first part of your round?
Well, the first kind of investor that we were able to close is we made it into the DreamIt Health Accelerator last summer. So in that sense, that was the perfect spot for us in our infancy, because there's a lot of nurturing. It was smart money. We were there for 3 months. They really helped kick us off, and it wasn't until November, December that we started thinking about raising a seed round and going through a more typical way of raising a round. And one of our first investors there, it was really just from the Dream It connections and everything that we did there that we were able to kind of have some trust with those investors, whereas we're 3 kids fresh out of school. That kind of helped us make those connections. So it was definitely that smart money that we got from Dream It that was really helpful in kicking off our later seed round.
We have a similar story. So we went through Dream It in February through May, and that was a good validation point for investors. In April, we went to the Philly Startup Leaders Expo, and we were demoing our prototype for the very first time. Omar from Ben Franklin was there, and he walked by with a friend of his, and his friend took an interest in what we were doing, so we were just talking to him. I had a lot of wine, and I don't remember half the things I said. But that probably helped with the mindset. Yeah, it really did. But then he emailed us the next day and he said, I really want to meet with you guys. And by then we had been doing due diligence with Ben Franklin. Nothing was closed yet. And we said, yeah, absolutely, let's talk. And we went up to media to meet with him. He backs social ventures. He's really, really passionate about it. He has a daughter. And because of Dream It and Ben Franklin investing in us, it gave him the confidence to seriously he wired $75,000 by the next week, and then he's put in another $25,000. So really lucky with that guy. So we're just finding someone who's really passionate and believes in us and our mission.
To echo what Adam's saying, finding that first investor is 10x, 20x harder than finding the next however many. I think our seed round had maybe 30 investors. Getting that first one was the hardest. The next 29 definitely fell in line. We also have a pretty similar story. We were in Y Combinator last summer. We were in the YC Summer 14 batch. And that definitely was the first step. And then we had our very first institutional investor, which was actually local first round. When they came in, there is a big signaling effect that happens in the investor world. So somebody like first round taking a position helps grease the tracks for many other people after that. So it is uber important that first money in.
So one of the great advice that I've received from various Philadelphia founders has been plan on going out and pitching 60 to 80 people. Your first 15 are practice. So know that, and in that, collect all of make sure they're with really smart people. And worst comes to worst, you would always take their money. But what you're really trying to gather there is what are the holes in your argument. Collect all of those objections that you have and formulate answers. Do you guys have any strategies that you've found effective, or that any mentors have given you in terms of the overall arching approach to raising money? You guys are just good.
Yeah, so something very similar. So Dream It, part of the benefit that you get is connections to investors. So they actually have angels and VCs come in, and they give you the opportunity to pitch your concept and your idea and give you feedback. And asking them specifically what they wanted to see 6 months from when we met was key for us. For us to go back to be like, hey, this is what you wanted, here's where we are, and it made a huge difference in moving forward with a lot of the companies and the VCs that we talked to.
Justin gave me great advice to undersell myself the first time I meet them, to give myself room for the second time when I meet them, which puts extra pressure on to make sure your numbers are really good the first time, that when you lie and actually undervalue yourself, that they're actually, that means they have to be quite incredible. So that was a great piece of advice. Do you have anything to follow on to that, or another piece of advice?
I think the number one key to raising capital is just having an insane amount of momentum for your startup. If your startup has momentum and you get in front of the investor and you're able to convince them that two things are inevitable, whatever you're building, it's inevitable that thing is going to own the market, and that in the future state, this is what the world's going to look like, and that it's inevitable that your company is going to raise capital, and you are going to be the company that makes that happen, whether they invest or not, is the number one thing that you have to achieve, and that all comes down to momentum. So that could be a key client coming on, it could be a key hire, it could, most likely is going to come down to traction, but it really is just, for me, learning from the Y Combinator experience last summer was the companies that had the most momentum were the ones who had no problem closing capital quickly. The ones who were struggling with momentum weren't able to raise capital.
Definitely what helped us in our first 15 going off that momentum idea was to, when we got advice, to change it really quickly and to iterate on that deck and just keep taking all that advice and drop the pride you had on one of your slides or something. Take that advice and really listen to it and then do it quickly, really quickly. And just keep changing it with every pitch you do, and eventually you'll know it so well and you'll have all those questions and pain points down that it won't be a question.
In echoing Peter's talk earlier with sales, like any objections or anything that are coming up, I'm a huge advocate of keeping your deck clean and simple, but have an appendix and have a slide presented ready for if something is brought up. I think there's a lot of correlation between how you'd make a sales deal in a framework perspective to the same thing you would do on a sales. There's different dynamics that you could play on that are important to know about, but I think that's a very valid strategy. So when you had the first contact with the investor, let's say you were introduced via email, how did you handle that relationship? How did you try to get to the next meeting or to get on a phone call with them?
We had a pretty planned out execution for this because all of us are fresh out of school, we're young, we don't have those contacts yet, this is all our first startup. So we had to think, without having that deep connection with all these people, how are we going to get on their radar without just cold emails? People aren't going to respond to that. So what we did a couple months out before our round is we went to all the events that those people on our list were going to be. So we attended South by Southwest and we participated in their accelerator. We went to TechCrunch Disrupt in May and participated in that. And that did a couple of things for us. One, it got us backstage. So you got to kind of chat everyone up and bend their ear before you went out and gave your pitch. Two, it got us a lot of great press. So those were kind of feathers in our cap moving forward. When we did have to go out and do a cold email, at least we could have all those amazing brands at the bottom of the email letting people know that we're not just three kids sitting at NextFab twiddling our thumbs, which, we weren't, but we were sitting at NextFab.
Yeah, and for us, it was just a warm intro to anyone we wanted to talk to. And if the investor didn't respond back, we are very persuasive, and we would just ping them again and again until they responded. And there were a few that would be like, hey, let's jump on a 20-minute call. That usually lasted longer if they were interested, which was great. But for what made the difference for us, I don't think I sent one call. Actually, the only cold email, semi-cold email that I sent is we had a crowdfunding campaign a month ago that just ended a few weeks ago. And right before it ended, Ashton Kutcher shared an article about what we were doing. So of course we were like, oh, we should get in touch with his VC firm. And I had someone that introduced me to the VC firm and then emailed them that way. So I don't know if that's semi-cold, semi-warm, whatever. But yeah, warm introductions work great because then they look at your network and they're more likely to respond.
So I think something Yasmine said earlier was sort of planting seeds. So before you're actually starting to raise capital, having connections, having conversations, so that when the time comes, that you are planting the flag in the ground and going out to raise the capital, you can go back to that group with a compelling event or some sense of urgency that, hey, we are starting, you've got the momentum, things are going well with your startup, and so use that sense of urgency that this is happening with or without them, it's time to talk. And then obviously, once that starts to build up and you start talking to the people that already are aware of you, then you'll start getting introductions to new folks. We also didn't send any cold emails to firms.
So to the note that both of you are making in terms of planting seeds, I think a lot of, we just had an investor lunch dinner where people could meet investors in the local area. But one side, I feel like that's related to even the product is a lot of startups will go out, they build a product, and then they just think the users are going to come. And then they realize they have to go out and get users, and they talk to their users, and then there's problems, and they have to go rebuild the product, and that keeps happening. And I'm a big believer with what Gabe Weinberg, DuckDuckGo puts forth is build your traction and your distribution and your product at the same exact time. And with your investors, you kind of want to be setting up those circumstances aligned with before you're about to go out and raise. So when you guys were planning your seeds, how did you handle the conversation of like, did you just say, we're not raising capital right now, but I'd like to meet with you? How did you send very clear signals of where you were at so they wouldn't dismiss you immediately?
I feel like we're in a weird stance, and Dream It really did it all for us. I mean, and what we did is we just said, hey, here's what we plan for the next year. Here's our timeline for what we're looking for, and we will be raising money at this point. But until then, here's what we're working towards, and what would you want to see? It was just kind of that simple.
Yeah, for us, for planting those seeds and getting those meetings of our 80 people on our list, it was more, when is a good time when we will be raising that we could come talk to you, and when can we, have a face-to-face that's always much better than on the phone or through email. So setting up the plan to, hey, we just met at TechCrunch backstage. We had a great conversation about this. Email immediately after. Would love to come out and see you. Set up a meeting. When's a good time? All very open.
So for your actual pitch, this is a place where you ask every individual in this room, and they'll give you completely different opinions on how to do it. How did you guys pitch? Like, I don't know if you could give us your opening line, but what was did you use an emotional story? Did you use a data? What was that first plug? I mean, VCs are on their phone, you have to draw them in and get their attention. How did you get their attention from the moment you stepped in?
Okay, well, Danny, our CEO, did all of the pitching, but the way we always get people's attention is we carry the device with us. So a 3D bioprinter, people think, oh, it's a 3D printer. And when the device is in front of you and you see its size and you get a sense of its capabilities, starting the meeting out with where this technology could go and getting people as excited as we are, trying to get them to kind of drink the Kool-Aid before we get into traction and all of that great stuff.
And for us, it was, and this was great coaching by Dream It, my very first line was always, after I sold my last company, I went on a solo 6-month trek across South America. So it was like to be like, oh, look, she has experience. And that was something that I wasn't sure I wanted to do. It sounded too arrogant, but it totally worked. And then, and then also we definitely do the emotional story. So I say that line, and then I actually get into what inspired Roar, and I talk about this 6-month trip that I took, where I kept meeting women that would share these stories of times they'd been assaulted, and then I go right in for the hook, which is I came back a week later, and there was a woman that was feeding her meter when she was grabbed from behind, dragged into an alley, beaten, and sexually assaulted, and no one's looking at their phone at all. And I try to make my whole pitch is a story.
We raised our whole angel round by phone, so I never met with anybody. I never even did most of the investors that invested, I never met in person. Didn't even do a video call. A lot of them were on just over the phone. So for us, it wasn't an emotional story. It was just educating them on the massive opportunity and helping them understand what status quo looks like today in the food delivery space, helping them understand what we think the future is going to be, and then tying that back to the momentum that we have on our way to get there. So a lot of our pitches actually, when it got to the later stage, we started raising institutional VC. In many cases, I never even broke out our deck. I would just have a conversation with the individual. And for me, what was always best was getting them to ask questions, right? And then being able to just knock each question out of the park. And I'd almost be able to predict for every single meeting what the questions were going to be, and I would steer the conversation to enable them to almost lead them down the path of asking me the questions that I wanted them to ask me. And that was almost always better than me rambling for 30 straight minutes, right? It was making it much more of a back and forth and engaging them and answering the questions that come to top of mind to them. It doesn't really matter where we started in the story. I was always able to weave it back into one, general narrative, but one that they sort of led.
So did a YC give you that advice? Because I've seen that from a few different YC companies now that, like Matan from 1 Month, he wrote a blog post about this, and I spoke to him about it, about ditch the pitch, where don't even keep the computer closed, only open it for your demo, and to make them look you in the eye and make them talk to you. It's very easy for them to ignore you otherwise. Was that a YC advice, or is that just something you just found effective?
It wasn't YC advice. So it wasn't directly YC advice. I think it worked for us because we have a service or a product that everybody can relate to, right? Ordering pizza and the problems with that, and so we were educating people about how the world works, and it's something that they were able to relate to. I'm not sure if that approach would work for every single type of business, but it worked quite well for ours.
Yeah, and to tag on to Yasmine's, I just sold my company last week, and the moment I say that to people, their faces completely change from when I saw them before. So if you could get to a moment like that, it makes it a lot easier to establish a status or credibility. And same thing with posting your links or getting press is a huge way of getting credibility off the start. On that note, let's take some questions from the audience. And whoever's going to answer them, could you just repeat the question into the microphone?
How important is your financial model during the fundraising process? And from angel to institutional, when does that start to become really important? How do you think about that in each process?
So the question was, how important is your financial model throughout the whole process, depending on who's investing, VC versus angel? It's definitely important to get them excited first and to get them to want to move towards the diligence phase. Some might ask you right at the table for some hard numbers right then and there. But more likely, it's not until they're more interested and they're kind of on the hook that they'll go through that deep diligence, and they want to see all your financial models and they want to see your business plan, and it better be tight, and you better not have lied about anything, because they will call everyone and make sure that you're not full of it.
Yeah, and to add on to that, same thing with us. And for the angels that we talked to, it was more about how we're going to get there than the actual numbers. They didn't matter as much. We have been lucky now that we are going to VC funding. We blew out our numbers, what we predicted. So that adds another layer of credibility for us moving forward. But for all the investors that I talked to, it was more about what's your go-to-market strategy? How do you see yourself getting there? More than they knew that the numbers were all swag.
Zoomer might be unique in this front. We didn't have a financial model that we shared with investors at all through the seed stage. So we never sent an Excel model to anybody. What they cared about was the unit economics and understanding how that works in our space. I'm not sure how much that applies to every single space, but in Zoomer's world, where we are delivering food for restaurants, giving a piece of that to the driver, and then keeping a piece for ourselves, understanding how that breaks down, what it looks like early, and then what it looks like when you scale, and making sure that they can get their head around that you actually have a fundable business, and that that one day you will see profit in terms. That's what they care about most, is just the fundamentals of the business, rather than what do they think we're going to be doing next month in revenue, 6 months in revenue, a year in revenue. Once you get to the Series A stage, then that matters a lot more. But we never shared a financial model for the first year plus of the company.
What are some of the best ways that you handle the Q&A with an investor? Is there any specific approach you give to it, or when you're answering questions?
So you're still pitching, right? So it's just a different way of pitching your business. So the best way to handle it is be able to know what they're going to ask ahead of time, and know how you're going to answer it, and make sure that answer tells your story in the best possible light. That might be a not a great answer for what you're looking for, but it's just another way of pitching. They almost never asked a question that was a surprise.
And just to add on to that, do you think that's because you did it so many times before, right? You had seen every question that they possibly could throw at you. I mean, practice with that definitely helped us.
That's definitely a good point. I think it's just knowing your business, right, and understanding what an early stage VC or an early stage angel is looking for, and whether it's market size or competition. Just there's tons of stuff now online that outlines what you're going to be drilled on. So yeah, preparation. You can just look through your deck, right? If you were going to do a 30-minute pitch, and then stop and be like, if somebody asked me a question and I was going to answer it in this way, what would that question be? And then help people lead them down that way.
I think it's also really valuable to, have your off-the-record mentors in a way. Go to them and just keep going to them and refining, and you can figure out the objections within 10 people usually, a good chunk of them, if you need someone to help question what you're assuming. Is there another question?
Yeah. So I'm bootstrapping currently, and when I'm talking to people about my invention, they're telling me, that sounds great, they're interested in it, they like hearing about my story. But it doesn't go more than that right now. So I'm wondering, how do I make the switch to getting these investors along with that? I'm answering these questions I'm not getting any that was the wrong answer, I'm not getting any negative feedback, but I'm also not getting that deal yet. Any thoughts or advice, comments on that?
Context, if you're willing to share. Do you have revenue? So if you're bootstrapping, or are you still
what
working?
traction you have?
I'll be willing to speak separately if that's okay.
Yeah. So basically, there's always 4 variables. Traction is the easiest way to sell. Period. It's just a great. Then you have your team, your product, and social proof. Okay. So those would be 4 elements that you could pull on. Traction is the heaviest, and we could speak off the side if you want.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there another question I saw? Yes.
So I have an iOS app that's basically it's a social network. I'm at a stage now where it's launched, but it's hard to get users. So do I have to put my own money into it, or because a lot of investors say we're too early, we're too early for VC funding, or even I guess some angel funding. Is there a point where you're okay, I have to put some money into this? If I don't, well then, I'm a hypocrite. Because I don't, I'm afraid to put money into my own product. That means I don't believe in it, blah, blah, blah. So, what's a good way to start out? You're at 0, you have 100 users. How do you get it out there, without putting your own money into it?
Yeah. So there's one thing that I would definitely start with is, if you are aiming at to bring in revenue, look at the market of what's getting invested at whatever level you are at, and
I'm not looking to get revenue off of it. The main goal is to sell to a bigger company. You buy out.
investors will have a hard time with that pitch, usually. I would assume. I mean, it depends. So each person's going to be looking for a different type of return. Friends and family are going to look for a much smaller return and be happy with that. Angels will be moderate. VCs are looking for huge returns. They're not. So the moment you go into the investment world, it's going to be a very different type of business. I'll share resources with you after. I don't know if anyone else has anything.
I was going to talk about the lean startup. I don't know if you're familiar with that, the whole idea of just getting user testing all along the way as you're building what you're building, because that's a great way to build the community and get the first initial set of users. And we use that to create evangelists for what we're building, and then they brought in other people through word of mouth and through influencer campaigns that we ran. So, but the lean startup methodology, I mean, that really helped us all along the way. We had a set core of people that we went to every time we refined our product, And then we asked them to bring their friends the next time around, and then asked them to bring their friends the next time around, and that helped us a lot before we even thought about funding, because it was about making sure that we were building the right type of product, that people wanted it, people would pay for it, and people would use it, and it would work the way it was supposed to work.
Yeah, and there's a great book called Traction by a local entrepreneur here, Gabe Weinberg from DuckDuckGo, and it's very complementary to the lean startup. Is there another question? Oh, the back.
Being a startup in Philly, like obviously, I'm talking about barriers coming to raising money. So like, what were the biggest barriers to raising money in Philly that maybe you wouldn't have seen in New York or like out in the Valley? And then how did you overcome those barriers that were specific to this market?
We didn't find a lot of pushback from our Philadelphia investors. In fact, there was a lot of support and, like I said, smart money here. So people are willing to give you the time, not only the investment, but the time to help hone that pitch. But if you are looking for, if you are looking for San Francisco money or you are looking for New York money, you kind of have to take the Amtrak up there and knock on people's door. You have to be there and talk to them. It's something we definitely did. Danny was carrying our 22-pound robot around San Francisco, sleeping on people's couches for about a month straight during the whole entire experience. So if you do want that money, you do have to hit the road and get out there and check it out.
It's good to know. I mean, there's great great investors here, but New York is, I take Bolt Bus, cheaper. But you can get up to New York. It's really easy. I actually have a place in New York and down here. So when I'm in New York, they think I'm a local New York entrepreneur. And when I'm in Philadelphia, I am in Philadelphia most of the time. I am a Philadelphia entrepreneur. And I know Rick Nucci has been another person where companies in San Francisco thought he was a San Francisco company with Boomi. When really he was building it in Philadelphia. So I think getting out there and building those networks are incredibly valuable, much more valuable than any place you could get customers from doing that. Just plan a long trip and spend a lot of time there, and just make it look like you're there. And pay for a co-working desk just so you can say, yeah, I have an office in SoMo or something like that. And a lot of people do it and it works.
Yeah, I was basically going to say the same thing, which is, to answer your question directly, what is the biggest hurdle of being in Philadelphia versus being located in San Francisco or New York? It would come down to, obviously Philadelphia, there's less money than in San Francisco or New York City. So you don't have the network. You need to build a network that extends beyond Philadelphia. So you're not only looking for money in Philly, you're looking for money wherever money is best for your company. And so you have to find a way to hack that and build your network. Zoomer was lucky in that we were in Y Combinator, which is based in Silicon Valley, so we were able to hack it by getting into there. But at the risk of harping the same thing over and over again, momentum will solve most of your issues, because if you get momentum with your startup, people will start making introductions for you. You will start to meet people. So that's the best. Just get traction, figure out how to get your thing going, and being introduced to great investors will happen if you earn it.
I want to take one last question. Yeah, right. The hand that was just up in front of the person who asked. Yeah.
I know you mentioned crowdfunding. I'm curious, did any of you guys ever consider Angels List or other online marketplaces for early stage investing?
Yeah, we use equity crowdfunding. So we use Funders Club, and that was amazing. I mean, it's great because you set your terms and they vet everyone for you, and there's kind of this third party that deals with the updates, and instead of email blasting 100 people that joined in, you email blast Funders Club and they'll do it for you. So that kind of helps moving forward. It worked really well for us. We really, really liked it.
And we used Indiegogo crowdfunding, so not for equity, but for sales. And that was also really, really great for us because it showed proof of what we were building and validation. We set our goal at 40 and we exceeded it. We got to 270. And we actually had investors that reached out to us. And Thanks. We were in due diligence process right before the campaign, and they reached out to us like, "Oh my God, this is great. Yeah, let's talk when things die down." And investors we didn't even talk to that were like, "You're doing great. Let's talk." So having that as proof to be like, "Oh hey, I exceeded my goal by this much." 668% is that was my last email to the Ashton Kutcher guy. That shows momentum, that shows traction, that shows proof, and it carries a lot of weight.
On that note, thank you guys. Girls.